The sun rose over Ouagadougou, painting the capital of Burkina Faso in hues of gold and amber. It was Monday, May 12th, 2025, and the city stirred with its usual rhythm, market vendors calling out, motorbikes weaving through dusty streets, and children laughing on their way to school. At the presidential palace, a fortress of white stone and iron gates, the air was quieter, charged with purpose. Guards stood at attention, their eyes scanning the horizon as a man emerged from the palace's arched doorway. President Ibrahim Traoré was a striking figure, his presence commanding yet unpretentious. At 36, he carried the weight of a nation on his broad shoulders, his neatly trimmed beard framing a face both resolute and compassionate. Today he wore a simple dark green tunic and trousers, the fabric unadorned but impeccably tailored. His eyes, sharp and searching, betrayed a soldier's vigilance, tempered by a leader's empathy. Traoré had risen to power through a coup in 2022, ousting a corrupt regime and earning the adoration of millions as a champion of justice and sovereignty. But on this morning, his mission was not one of speeches or statecraft. It was personal, driven by a quiet resolve known only to him. He approached his driver, a wiry man named Musa, who stood beside a black SUV. "Drive me to the central prison," Traoré said, his voice low but firm. "No press, no entourage. Just us." Musa's eyes widened. "The prison, sir?" "But—" "No questions," Traoré interrupted, climbing into the vehicle. "I want to see how the people there are living. No one must know." Musa nodded, swallowing his surprise, and started the engine. The SUV rolled out of the palace gates, escorted by two unmarked police cars, their presence discreet. The 40-minute drive to Ouagadougou's Central Correctional Facility was silent, save for the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. Traoré gazed out the window, watching the city blur past. Mud brick homes, baobab trees, and roadside stalls selling mangoes and roasted corn. His mind was fixed on a dream from the night before. A man in a dark cell, his face hidden, his voice whispering, "I am innocent." The ancestors, Traoré believed, were speaking, and he could not ignore their call. The prison loomed ahead, a gray fortress surrounded by high walls topped with barbed wire. Dust swirled around its gates, and the air carried a faint tang of rust and despair. The guards at the entrance froze as they recognized the presidential vehicle, their rifles trembling in their hands. "Mr. President," one stammered, fumbling to open the gate. "We weren't informed." "I know," Traoré said, stepping out. "That's why I'm here. Take me inside." The prison warden, Monsieur Pascal, a short man with a sheen of sweat on his brow, hurried forward, his uniform slightly askew. "Sir, if we had known, we would have prepared." "I'm not here for preparations," Traoré said, brushing past him. "Take me to the prisoners. I want to speak with them." Pascal hesitated, then obeyed, leading Traoré through a narrow hallway that echoed with footsteps and distant cries. The air was thick with the stench of sweat, mold, and hopelessness. As they entered the main prison block, a cavernous space lined with overcrowded cells, the inmates fell silent. Hundreds of eyes turned to the president, some curious, others fearful, a few defiant. Men sat on the floor playing cards with tattered decks or lay on thin mats, staring at the ceiling. A few knelt in prayer, their murmurs barely audible. Traoré moved among them, his presence both commanding and humble. He shook hands, asked questions, and listened intently. "How long have you been here?" he asked a young man with a scarred cheek. "What was your crime?" he inquired of an older inmate with graying hair. "Do you have family?" he said to a boy who looked barely 20. The prisoners responded cautiously, their voices tinged with suspicion, unsure if this was a test or a miracle. But Traoré's kindness disarmed them, his eyes meeting theirs with a sincerity that cut through the prison's gloom. After an hour, as he neared the end of a dimly lit corridor, Traoré's gaze fell on a man sitting alone in a cramped cell. Unlike the others who stood or clamored for attention, this man was still, his head bowed, his hands clasped tightly. His clothes were threadbare, his face gaunt, and his eyes, when he finally looked up, carried a weight of sorrow that stopped Traoré in his tracks. "What is your name?" Traoré asked, stepping closer to the bars. The man lifted his head slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Issouf," he said. Issouf Traoré. Traoré's heart skipped a beat, not at the shared surname, common in Burkina Faso, but at the man's eyes which mirrored the face from his dream. How long have you been here, Issouf? 7 years, sir, Issouf replied, his voice cracking. What was your crime? Issouf swallowed hard, his hands trembling. They said I stole from my employer, a merchant in the market. But I didn't. I was his clerk for 10 years, loyal, honest. He accused me to cover his debts, to blame someone else. I had no lawyer, no voice. I was a poor man. Traoré studied him, noting the absence of anger in Issouf's tone, only a quiet, bone-deep pain. Why didn't you appeal? I tried, Issouf whispered, but I had no money. My sister, my only family, couldn't afford to visit. She wrote once saying she was sick. I don't even know if she's alive. No one has come for me in 7 years. The cell was silent, the other prisoners and guards watching, their breaths held. Traoré felt a fire ignite within him, the same fire that had driven him to lead a nation. I believe you, Issouf, he said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. Pascal gasped. Mr. President, with respect. I said I believe him, Traoré repeated, his eyes never leaving Issouf's. Turning to the guards, he issued a command. Bring me his case file by the end of today. Every detail, who arrested him, who judged him, who accused him, everything. Yes, sir, the guards replied, scrambling to obey. Traoré looked back at Issouf, whose eyes glistened with disbelief. Your story is not over, he said. I give you my word. As Traoré walked out of the prison block, the inmates stood in silent reverence. The air had shifted, heavy with a nascent hope. Outside, he turned to Moussa. Cancel my meetings today. We're going to the Ministry of Justice. But sir, Moussa began. No excuses, Traoré said. A man's life is waiting. The SUV sped toward the ministry, carrying not just a president, but a mission that would reshape a nation. At the Ministry of Justice, a modern building with glass windows and marble floors, Traoré sat in a sparsely furnished office. The case file of Issouf Traoré opened before him. The air conditioner hummed, but it couldn't cool the anger simmering in his chest. Issouf's face, tired, honest, broken, haunted him. He had met world leaders, faced coups and crises, but this man's quiet suffering struck a deeper chord. It was personal, a reminder of the ancestors' whispers, of the duty he owed not just to the powerful, but to the forgotten. Get me the Chief Justice, Traoré said to his aide, a young woman named Amina. Now. Amina nodded and hurried out. Moments later, Justice Minister Doumbia entered, his suit crisp but his expression uneasy. Mr. President, you summoned me urgently, he said, adjusting his glasses. Yes, Traoré replied, his voice like steel. I visited Ouagadougou Central Prison this morning. I met a man named Issouf Traoré, locked up for 7 years for a crime he swears he didn't commit. The courts failed him. His case must be reopened. I want to know who judged it, who arrested him, and why he had no legal support. Doumbia hesitated. Sir, the courts are complex. Complex? Traoré cut in. A man has lost 7 years of his life, abandoned by a system meant to protect him. This isn't just about Issouf. How many more are suffering in silence? Yes, sir, Doumbia said, his voice subdued. I'll review his file personally. Not just you, Traoré said. Form a task force, independent lawyers, no ties to politics. I want truth, not excuses. Within hours, a team of legal experts and human rights advocates was assembled. They pored over Issouf's file, uncovering a trail of corruption that made their stomachs turn. The trial had been overseen by a judge, now disgraced, known for taking bribes. Issouf's employer, a wealthy merchant named Moussa Konaté, had fabricated evidence to deflect scrutiny from his own financial misdeeds. No lawyer had represented Issouf, and the only evidence was a coerced confession, signed under duress. This is a travesty, one lawyer muttered. He was framed. That evening, Traoré received the report. He read each page, his jaw tightening. When he finished, he closed the file and whispered, I knew he was telling the truth. The next morning, he returned to the prison, this time with a small entourage of reporters and cameras. The nation watched, stunned, as Traoré entered Issouf's cell. Issouf, he said, his voice warm but resolute. I've read your file. You were not only wrongly accused, you were betrayed by a system that should have protected you. I'm sorry. Issouf blinked, his mind struggling to process the words. Sir, you're going home, Traoré said. Today. Gasps echoed through the prison. Issouf's knees buckled, tears spilling down his cheeks. Is this real? He asked, his voice trembling. Yes, Traoré said, placing a hand on his shoulder. You're a free man. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Locals, reporters, even former inmates who had heard the news. Issouf stepped into the sunlight, his eyes squinting against its brilliance. He was thinner, older, his clothes hanging loosely on his frame. He carried nothing but the weight of 7 lost years. Reporters surged forward, microphones thrusting toward him. How do you feel, sir? What will you do now? Issouf looked at his hands, then at the sky. I don't know, he said softly. I have no family, no home. But I have freedom. That's enough for now. Traoré guided him to the presidential SUV. You're not alone, he said. They drove to a guest house near the palace, where Issouf bathed in clean water, ate a meal of rice and peanut stew, and slept on a soft bed for the first time in years. The next day, Traoré invited him to the palace. Tell me your story, he said. Your childhood, your dreams. Issouf spoke of growing up in a village near Banfora, of his love for books, of his dream to open a small school. He recounted his years as a clerk, his loyalty to Konate, and the betrayal that shattered his life. I wanted to teach him, he said, but the world had other plans. Traoré nodded. The world has changed again, Issouf, and now you choose. That afternoon, Traoré held a press conference, Issouf standing beside him in borrowed clothes, his hands still trembling. Today we right a wrong, Traoré said, his voice resonating through the microphones. But this is not just about one man. Our justice system is broken, and we must fix it. No citizen should suffer in silence. He turned to Issouf. Meet Issouf Traoré, a survivor. He will join a task force to investigate wrongful imprisonments across Burkina Faso. The crowd erupted in applause, cameras flashing. Issouf's tears were no longer of despair, but of hope. In that moment, a forgotten man became a symbol of justice reborn. The news spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed, President Traoré frees innocent man after surprise prison visit. Radio stations buzzed, and social media exploded with hashtags like #Justice for Issouf and #Ibrahim Traore. But for Traoré, Issouf's release was a spark, not the fire's end. The next morning he summoned Minister Doumbia. I want a national audit, he said. Every prisoner serving over 5 years, especially those without legal support. One innocent man in jail is one too many. Doumbia paled. Sir, that's a massive undertaking. Then we start now, Traoré said, his tone unyielding. Issouf, now settled in the guest house, began to navigate a world that had changed in his absence. Smartphones baffled him, the city's pace overwhelmed him, but his spirit grew stronger each day. One evening, an aide handed him a notebook and pen. The president thought you might want to write, the aide said. Issouf opened it, penning a single line. 7 years in shadows, now I see the light. At the Ministry of Justice, Traoré convened a meeting with the task force, Issouf at his side. Today we listen to the unheard, Traoré said. Issouf, speak. Issouf stood, his voice steady despite his nerves. I was 25 when they took me. My employer betrayed me, the police beat me, the judge ignored me. I signed a confession I didn't write. In prison, I lost my sister, my dreams, my name. I'm not here to blame. I'm here to ask, how many more are like me? The room was silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Traoré clapped, and soon the others joined, not out of duty, but out of awe. Issouf was appointed head of the Justice Review Task Force, tasked with visiting prisons nationwide to uncover the innocent. Their first stop was Dori, a northern town where a small prison held stories as grim as Issouf's. In Dori, Issouf met Amadou, a man jailed for 10 years on charges of theft with no evidence. I was a tailor, Amadou said, his hands calloused. They said I stole fabric, but it was my boss who sold it. No one listened. Issouf nodded, echoing Traoré's words. I believe you. We'll help you. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré worked relentlessly, meeting judges, retraining police, and digitizing prison records. He signed releases, ordered retrials, and compensated the wrongly jailed. The nation watched in awe as dozens were freed, each story fueling the fire of reform. But resistance brewed among the powerful. He's exposing our failures, a senior judge muttered. This could ruin us. Traoré, undeterred, addressed the nation on television. Justice is not a privilege for the rich, he said. It's a right for every citizen. Issouf reminded me that leadership is about people, not power. His words, paired with a proverb, justice is not given, it is earned and protected, became a rallying cry. One day, a letter arrived from a village called Po, written by a woman named Fatimata. My brother Suleiman has been in prison for 8 years. He was accused of robbery, but he's innocent. Please help. Traoré read it, then summoned Issouf. We're going to Po. The convoy arrived in Po, a quiet village of mud huts and acacia trees. Fatimata, an elderly woman with a weathered face, greeted them, her eyes brimming with tears. My brother was a farmer, she said. He was arrested after a neighbor lied to settle a grudge. I've begged the police, but they laugh. At Po Regional Prison, a crumbling structure with no proper records, Traoré demanded the logbook. Issouf found an entry. Suleiman K., arrested for robbery, no trial. They located his cell where a frail man sat, his eyes distant. Suleiman, Traoré said, your sister wrote to me. You're going home. Suleiman wept, clutching Fatimata as they reunited outside. Traoré held a press briefing on the spot, holding up the tattered logbook. This is not justice, it's failure. No one will be held without records again. He announced a law mandating digitized files and mandatory case reviews, sparking cheers from the villagers. On the drive back, Issouf turned to Traoré. How did we let this happen for so long? We stopped listening, Traoré said. Power deafens you to the silent, but we're listening now. Months later, Traoré's reforms, dubbed Operation Justice Light, had freed over 200 innocent prisoners. Issouf, now a national figure, led teams across Burkina Faso, his notebook filled with stories of the unheard. But one case hit close to home. Moussa Konaté, the merchant who framed him, was linked to other false accusations. Issouf brought the evidence to Traoré. He's still hurting people, he said. Traoré formed a commission to investigate Konaté's empire. They uncovered forged documents, bribed officials, and silenced workers. Konaté was arrested, his trial a national spectacle. Issouf testified, facing the man who stole 7 years of his life. You took my freedom, he said, but you taught me to fight for others. Konaté was sentenced to 20 years, his judge confessing to past bribes. Issouf was declared a national hero, his pain transformed into power. Traoré, in a speech, said, let the powerful know, your wealth won't shield you. Let the poor know, you are seen. A year later, at a stadium in Ouagadougou, Traoré and Issouf stood before thousands, joined by freed prisoners wearing sashes reading, Justice Restored. Issouf spoke. I thought silence was my fate, but someone listened and it changed everything. Listen to the unheard, stand for the unseen. Justice is a right, and we must protect it. The crowd roared, candles lit across the nation for Justice Day. That night, Traoré offered Issouf a role as special advisor on justice and human rights. You don't need a degree, Traoré said. You have truth. Issouf accepted, launching programs to educate villages about legal rights. His old cell, now empty, bore a plaque. This cell held a man the world forgot, but it sparked a justice reborn. Issouf closed its door, stepping into a future he never imagined. Burkina Faso, too, was reborn, its chains broken by a president's courage and a prisoner's voice. A YouTube video, President Traoré Savi's innocent man from 7-year ordeal, went viral, its thumbnail of Issouf's release, and hashtags like Sarkozy's Justice for Issouf driving millions of views. The narrator ended, if this story moved you, hit subscribe, like, and share. Turn on the bell to never miss a tale of justice from Burkina Faso. Let's spread Issouf's voice. Justice is not a gift. It is a right, earned through listening, courage, and truth. One voice, once silent, can change a nation.